Hello and welcome to another week of Mastering Dungeons. I'm Sean Merwin here with Teos Abadia. Hey Teos, what's up?
Hey Sean, how are you doing? I am now fully vaccinated and I celebrated by staying at home and doing garden work.
Yep. I am 2 days away from being fully vaccinated or fully protected. So by the time this show drops, I will be running naked through the wilds of Western New York, screaming, "Give me your COVID, I can take it." Or something.
I don't think that's how it works.
Is that okay? Well,
you might want to read a CDC guidance.
I was going to say, I
the
think
nudity. I think is great. That I think they encourage.
Okay, that's good. But that was my brochure that I got might have been the wrong one, but anyway. And I have to ask, are you a New York Times best-selling author?
No.
Are you a columnist for the Financial Times?
No.
No. Are you a knight? Have you been awarded the OBE?
No.
Oh, well, this is sort of a letdown from last week. Then.
I know. We've really come down
when we
hard.
had Tim Harford on. So if you did not hear last week's episode, go check that out. Tim Harford was on talking about his podcast specifically, which an episode covered the Satanic Panic and had some great stories about that, as well as talking economics and Dungeons and Dragons and all sorts of amazing topics from a very talented intellect and a great writer. So go check that out. This week you're stuck with just Teos and I.
And really, his whole podcast is fantastic. I was listening with my kids as I drove them to and from track practice, to his episode that he does with Martin Luther King and improvisation. Mm-hmm. Man, it's really cool. So that whole it's good. It's like my new radio lab. It's just something I love to listen to these and hear him. And he's got such a great voice for it. And
yeah. I was listening to the episode on Pepsi and the contests. And how Pepsi almost went bankrupt because of the contests they were running. Just amazing, fun, well-told stories that have this sort of economic behavioral science sort of background. That's amazing. But like I said, this week you're stuck with Teos and I just talking about D&D, but I hope we can keep you entertained as we cover first the news, and then we get to the final part of Tasha's Cauldron of Everything on the DM side, where we're going to discuss puzzles,
and we'll do it in a British accent in honor of Tim.
In honor of Tim, exactly. So first up, this is my British accent, by the way. So first up, there was an amazingly interesting article on the Wizards of the Coast website where they talked about, it's a blog series, and the first in the series is talking about the new studio that they opened up. So it's obvious they went through sort of a restructuring. At some point they did. And so they describe what that restructuring is and sort of frequently ask questions about how things are made in the D&D side, the game side of things.
Brandy, fascinating. And it sounds like this is the beginning of a series they'll do. They kind of said frequently, but we're not going to tell you how often.
Right.
And they're going to have different people from the studio speaking about sort of how they do their business, which is awesome.
Yeah, so the information in it is interesting, which we're going to tell you all about in a second. But it's also interesting because you don't do these things without a reason, generally. Mm. You don't say, "Hey, look, here's our new company," or "Here's our new setup," and sometimes it's just to gain goodwill with your consumers or your fans. Sometimes you're trying to get people thinking in a certain direction, and so thinking about why they did this now is interesting for me as well. So Brandy Camel, the community lead, introduces the series and what they hope to achieve with the entire blog series. And then executive producer Ray Winninger takes over and writes the blog post or the blog article, Who We Are and What We Do. Ray has been a long-suffering designer in the industry, in the sense that he's done some really amazing work and he's been around quite a while. Yeah. He sort of got out of the game industry itself for a bit and did more things in terms of like digital design and things of that nature before coming back to Wizards of the Coast to take over the D&D team.
And as we can see, the years away from the industry really hurt his career.
Yes.
So never leave the industry. Keep writing for 2 cents a word. That's the secret to success.
Yeah, that's
I'm
the way it
being
seems.
sarcastic. I apologize to everybody.
Yeah, Teos is in full sarcasm mode.
I mean, it's unfortunate that in almost every industry, the secret to advancement is leave for a bit.
But well, I have friends who are not anti D&D, but they're like, D&D is just one of an amazing array of role-playing games that you should be playing, and several of them have played non-D&D games that Ray wrote, back in the day, like back in the 90s and 2000s, and just absolutely love it. So when I told them that he had taken over as the lead for basically the D&D team, they were like, wow, oh wow, maybe we'll have to check D&D out again. So he has cred in the sort of indie RPG world as well.
I have recently reread his old Dungeon Craft articles, and I have to say, man, that is a series that stands the test of time. You could almost write it word for word today, and it wouldn't feel dated. I mean, it's really surprisingly good, and which is to say, it was ahead of its time, the type of thinking he was applying back then. So, right. I can see that.
So he is a great game design mind, and he is now leading the D&D team. And so even though he's already been at Wizards as the head of D&D for 2 years, he is now introducing himself again to everyone. And so then he goes into what the studio does. So what his game design, D&D game design studio does. And as the name pretty much describes it, it handles the actual role-playing game products.
Yeah, can I just back up 1 second to say that what is a studio? Because a studio is a sort of type of business approach, and it comes from the idea of being sort of like almost like a tech incubator. And in big companies, it's the concept that instead of having like a small department that works with all the rest of the departments in the building or buildings, it's the idea that you try to act as if you were a little mini thing all by yourself. And you have all the things that you need to work on. So you're very insular, as if you were like a tech startup kind of incubator approach, rather than being sort of spider web out into all the rest of the company.
Right. So the 4 departments that are in the studio sort of exemplify that, which is game design, which is responsible for developing the game mechanics and the stories. Then there's the art department within the studio, which does the look and feel, right? It does the visual concepts, directs freelancers, comes up with graphic design, innovations, and so on. Then there's the production department. They manage the schedules, interface with the manufacturing folks, and then handle like administrative matters. And then the product management team interfaces with sales, with marketing, with research. So rather than having a separate production team outside of D&D, they have brought people into D&D to act as production. So they still interface with others, but the members themselves are within the studio.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And then they also delineate what isn't inside the studio, which is equally interesting, because I think sometimes we hear things like this video game or the T-shirts and the hats and mugs and the upcoming TV show, movies, all that. And they said that's not our group, right? Other teams handle that. There are teams for the D&D video games, the merchandise, the entertainment offerings. And so while Perkins or Crawford might be brought in to assist the teams that are doing that, they don't actually know all of it. They might not be up on the latest copy of the script of the movie or the upcoming TV show or whatever, or even what's on the Twitch schedule. And so he specifically says like they can't answer questions on those things, right?
Yeah.
Or won't, because it's not their area.
Exactly. And also the studio will collaborate with sales, with marketing, PR, community management, and so on. Those are separate areas where the studio will interface with them to answer questions, but not take on those roles.
Yeah.
And so one of the major things that the studio will have to do is decide what to produce, which is interesting because in most businesses I've been involved in, whether it's academics or, sort of the nonprofit side of things, public sector, private sector, there's sales and marketing and PR generally have a large say in what you do. So I'm wondering if how long this lasts, because just as a business, someone who is interested in how businesses run, seeing that a red flag went up for me, like, oh, we'll see how long that you're deciding what to produce before sales and marketing are telling you what to produce.
And also there's a difference between intent and what you're actually doing. And so sometimes there are these rules that are on paper that say, hey, our studio does this, and then we collaborate with you. And in theory, because you're supposed to do that, you wouldn't have, like, say, last minute changes to a product based on some red flag that comes up in some other team,
right?
Unless it really, really merited. But it wouldn't be a whim, right? And therefore you're allowed to focus and get your job done. But what often happens at companies, and I visit a lot of really big companies, is that while that's what's on paper, still somehow, Sam at marketing can throw project sideways and everybody just has to deal because that's the way it happens there. And I think we see enough from Wizards to suspect that there's a little more on paper than there is in practice, right? And so maybe it won't change drastically because there's still that engine of underplaying the written rules, which there shouldn't be, right? If the studio model is to shine. So we'll see how that shapes up too.
Yeah, so good luck with that. We hope it works out for you.
We do.
But when they do decide what to produce, Ray set out a sort of a guide for how it works. Once per quarter, the studio leadership will review pitches by the employees. And then those with merit are assigned to be developed further, and then there's an approval process that will get it onto the schedule with a product lead who will own the vision and own the schedule, designing some of it themselves, and then deciding who else gets to design on it. And he also noted that they develop almost twice as many products as they end up publishing, which will allow the best to go to market. Now, this is interesting for me because I totally get the concept of getting something to a certain point, and then it's almost like a launch, right? A rocket launch. Yeah. Do we have thumbs up or thumbs down, right? Go or no go? And it's interesting to see that maybe Wizards is large enough now where they can afford to do that, where they can afford to get products far enough along to figure out, okay, this is what we're going to publish, this is what we're not going to publish. Because unless you have a lot of overhead, to not waste money, but to spend the money to get those prototypes and to get that far enough along to make that decision is a luxury. And if they had that luxury now, then I'm happy for them.
And the key again is doing it well, right? Because there are stories from the TSR days of product lines that would get pretty far along and then would be killed. And often the designers would feel, and they'll say this on message boards and things like that, how they wish that product had happened and they wanted it badly, and they don't agree with why it didn't go through or why it went as far as it did before it was axed, right? And so that's the key to being a good company, is to know how to put in those checks early enough that you can find out whether the product should be created or not, and stop or shelve it and go, great, we're going to focus instead in this direction. And that's something they don't address here, and it's hard to do this perfectly, right? But it's fine to come up with lots of ideas, but you don't want to waste your talent and focus on it or burn out creators, because like if you write something and you hand it in and someone says, great, but could you redo this? That's a really painful thing.
Right. And what's and it even
burns
more
you out if it happens.
Yeah. And what's also painful is, great, can you redo this? Okay, great. Can you redo this one more time? Oh, by the way, it's not going in the book, or, oh, by the way, we're not doing that book. That is serious burnout. So
your entire piece was cut. And if you're communicating that to freelancers, right? We couldn't use your idea, even though it was great. That's rough.
Yeah, it is.
But interesting. Almost twice as many products as they publish is a fascinating thing, and small companies can't handle that, right? You cannot spend that time doing that.
Yeah. So he goes through the 2001 schedule, and he tells who was involved in what products. 2021. Thank you. Who was the lead on certain products that are coming out and who is working on what now. They don't give specific projects, but they say, well, James Wyatt is taking on this project that Ray initiated, and Perkins will be returning to make the big summer/fall adventure, and so on. So, it's got that sort of that inside baseball without giving away too many details. A really cool question. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, there's a total of 5 new unannounced products, one of which would be your expected mega adventure that Perkins is working on, but another extra 4. That's a lot.
That is a lot. It is a lot, which again means that they now have the staff to do it, and hopefully the budget to reach out to freelancers to work on the things where they don't have the in-house staff to do it. An interesting question that comes up all the time, I'm sure, and so they put it in this document, is how much influence does Hasbro have? And the answer is
12 to 14 months.
No. How much does Hasbro have? How much?
How much? You want? Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes. So the answer is none.
Yeah.
Right. The answer is, and this is something we've talked about on the show, that Wizards and Hasbro are pretty much separate and autonomous, and that is clearly shows some of the hand of why this blog is being written, to answer questions like this that may be misinformation or misunderstanding of the customer base as to how Wizards operates, and something you see in all kinds of formats, Twitch, Twitter, blogs, forums, is someone saying, well, because of Hasbro. And
Right.
Those of us who work with D&D closely enough know Hasbro barely ever does anything around the decision making. And so they talk about this, right? Hasbro greenlights the major investments. Like if they're going to do something like make a D&D video game, then that huge outlay does require some oversight. And they might choose to collaborate on something like they did on one of the beginner board games. But otherwise, it's really Wizards making the decision, not Hasbro.
Yeah. And he also, to go back to what Teos said earlier, the 12 to 14 months is the minimum that it takes to create and publish a product.
Yeah.
And if you think about that, that's at least a year from initial conception of a product or a project to its completion. And in our day and age, how much can change in a year is huge. An idea that sounded good 12 months ago may sound terrible now.
Yeah.
So it's always that balance you have to make, and that's why you want to have various products being developed at the same time. Even if you're going to say no to one, it's good to have a backup ready to go in case of some sort of large scale catastrophe that means this product that you were very, very close to publishing can't be published.
Right. Or if another one you find that idea that's been on the back burner would actually be perfect right now, then you can accelerate that. I also want to note that a lot of this was people focused, which is always going to happen. But he talks about the studio leadership being currently Crawford Perkins, Amanda Hammond, Wes Schneider, James Wyatt, and more are being trained. And these various projects that they talk about, the different 5 projects coming up, they kind of talk about who's leading them. And it was interesting to me that, James Wyatt used to be in a different department and has come back over recently, or at least it was announced recently. It's hard to always know how long someone's been doing what, because Wizards tends to not communicate this kind of things. Right. But then Amanda Hammond and Wes Schneider are all relatively recent hires coming over from Paizo, where they had tons of responsibility. So it's not at all bizarre that they're doing these activities. It's all very fitting. But it is interesting that they're relatively new in terms of being back at Wizards or at Wizards, and that it isn't other folks who say have been longer at Wizards, right? That's always a hard thing to balance with your staff. So.
Yeah. And the last big question they answer, which is one of the most interesting ones for me, is how can I become a freelancer? And they say use the DM's Guild, which we're going to talk about in a second. And then they linked to 2 other pieces of media. And it's interesting. They linked to an old interview. It's 4 years old now.
Yeah.
With James Haek talking about, how he became a designer, freelance designer on some Wizards books. And then they put up a YouTube video that had Lisa Penrose and Celeste Conowitch and I think Justice Armand and
Lisa
one more.
Penrose.
It was
Celeste and
hang on, it'll come to me. It's she runs the writing D&D design workshop.
Ashley.
Ashley, thank you. So none of the people who they linked the advice to are actually Wizards of the Coast employees, which I found interesting.
And they're not constant D&D freelancers, right? They don't like they all have a product,
right?
But they don't necessarily have 5 products or reliable work with them, or
So they're all amazing people. They're all amazing creators. They all have really good points to make. It's just odd for me that no one from Wizards of the Coast actually said, hey, this would be or they didn't link to any panels that had Wizards of the Coast employees at the moment, which I thought was, I don't know what that says. I don't know if it's telling that's the case, but it was of note. Let's put it that way.
Well, it is telling to me because they have been saying for a long time that the key to working with Wizards is the DM's Guild, and it doesn't hold up, right? Mm-hmm. That's not to say it doesn't happen, but I mean, MT Black had been this prolific DM's Guild creator, dominating the DM's Guild, unbelievably so, and then finally got a writing assignment. Mm-hmm. But I mean, it took a long time for that to happen, and it couldn't have been a more obvious name. And how do you, I mean, I wouldn't say on anybody try to be MT Black. And even then, you had to do some serious waiting, and other people were getting in first. So it's clearly not the biggest way in, but they always act as if it is. And Candlekeep Mysteries, I mean, Perkins revealed pretty clearly he did it through Twitter and word of mouth, right?
Yeah.
Whichever names were mentioned the most. And I think the reality is that is how you get in, is if it's not, be it part of Hollywood scenes, it's word of mouth that's going to slowly build up over time. Right. And the DM's Guild is more about sharpening your skills and you self-learning and interacting with an customer base so that you know how to make good products. But it's I don't believe that there really is someone at Wizards sifting through the DM's Guild to find great talent.
Yeah, and
I could be wrong.
Maybe the audience. Maybe the audience is more of the tool that you can use. And how do you get an audience of game fans of players now? Is it DM's Guild or is it put up a stream? Right? Is it becoming a voice actor and then find your audience there? It's an interesting question,
and it's a hard thing to balance if you are someone. There are a lot of people that are sort of in between, right? You have some people who are just really well-known writers with established careers that have worked for other companies or for D&D or whatever that are obvious, like, they can do the work. And then there are people who are very new, but maybe have something like a stream or something that gets attention. And those kinds of folks came into Candlekeep, which is awesome, right? Because you're getting this sort of new, broad, diverse talent trained up. But the people in the middle, I don't know how they get noticed. And someone in the middle, I think you can look at this section on this blog and go, you haven't told me how I can get in.
Right. Yeah. And it's a long shot anyway. So
it's true.
so that's something that they obviously don't say, but if we're going to live in reality, that's there.
It's fascinating.
But anyway,
but then I wonder why spend this space on this if it's not really a thing. Why say it? It's really interesting.
Yeah. So you can go to the dndwizards.com website, and it's one of the first things you see is the D&D Studio Blog. Whew. So that was a lot of news right there, and we're just getting started.
Yeah, but it's great. I'm really glad that exists. Like, that's a neat move by Wizards, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting what future blogs have to say. Speaking of the D&D studio, Adam Lee is leaving the D&D team. Adam has been highly involved in all of the recent publications, and now he is leaving the D&D team to join the Wizards franchise team, where he will be developing D&D and Magic content for movies, media, and more. We learned that from a Twitter post from Adam.
Yeah, super interesting. I really like Adam's design. The parts of Adventures that I know that he has worked on have been some of my favorites. So I'm in some ways sad to see him move over, but this could also be a really neat place, and these kinds of positions really need people that understand how D&D works. So seeing somebody that has the knowledge that Adam Lee has be there is a real win for Wizards and hopefully then for us.
Mm-hmm. And as more of the movies, TV shows, and other media come out, it'll be interesting to see his fingerprints on those projects. Wow. I mean, moving down to the third news item, which is huge. When this came out, I was like, oh, I can't wait to talk about this.
Yeah.
So the new organized play storyline campaign is going to be Ravenloft Mist Hunters. So this will be like Oracle of War, sort of an offshoot of the campaign. So it's a separate from the Forgotten Realms campaign. And it will be releasing July 9th during the virtual play weekend for July. It will take place in the domains of dread, where you'll traverse eerie lands as you unravel a mystery that has far-reaching consequences, culminating in an epic confrontation with an implacable foe. And one thing, just to go back, in none of the talk of the D&D studio did they mention organized play.
Yeah.
So this for those of us who are have spent 20 years plus in organized play are not surprised by that, but I'm excited for this. So we have a new campaign coming, and you want to carry us through this?
Well, what's fascinating is you and I, as students of organized play, we love to see how someone decided to design this, and this is a very different approach, which is awesome. I always love experimentation. So Mist Hunters is going to focus on story, atmosphere, and immersive interaction, and less on combat. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
And very fitting of Ravenloft. It's going to feature 1st through 8th level play. And here's the really interesting one. No rules documents to read. It's going to use a story-driven guided character creation experience. What do you think of that, Shawn?
Yeah, well, I hope this is more than just hype, right? I hope this no rules documents to read is something that they can carry through on. And it's hard to do.
Yeah.
Especially with D&D players, especially with organized play D&D players who are used to the organized play experience, which obviously requires some extra rules.
Yeah, and we've seen some efforts like this, right? The original Red Box was like this. The 4th edition Red Box sort of had this approach where you're, seeing kobolds or goblins attack a caravan, and you get to decide: do you want to hide and move around? Oh, well, now you're a rogue. Do you want to, what is your approach? Oh, well, look, you have a spell, and then you give people their character bits, and that's what they are. Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see what they do.
But if they can pull this off, it's brilliant. Because what is the hardest thing with D&D is teaching new players. Mm-hmm. The hardest thing with organized play is getting new players in with these extra rules on top of everything else. Yeah. What can you play? What can't you play? What do you have access to? What don't you have access to? If you can do that during a play experience, rather than, hey, new person, read all the D&D rules and then also read this 30-page document. That right there is a barrier to entry. So if you can say during your first adventure, even if you know nothing about D&D and know nothing about organized play, by the end of this 2-4 whatever hour experience, you will not only have a character ready to play, you will understand the rules of the campaign without any need for extra documentation. And I've got my hands together in prayer, hoping that this is something that they're able to do, because I would have loved to have tried this with Oracle of War. Yeah. But it would have been just too much too quickly. So maybe this is the time.
Maybe. I mean, this is to me the kind of thing that would have been amazing to do across summer conventions in person, right? Where you have the thousands of people coming to say, how can I play? Mm-hmm. And you could run them through this experience, and the buy-in you would achieve by having all these hundreds of people that would have character sheets that they made, right, during play. Right. That would really set them on now I want to play the next piece, which you could do from wherever. Mm-hmm. The virtual play weekends have been doing well in terms of numbers, but I don't know, will it have the sticking power of if you had been at Origins, Gen Con, PAX, right? So because that's an important part, because what's going to happen is you're then going to move on to Adventure 2. And Adventure 2 is probably going to assume that you're just bringing that character. So you're either a pre-gen or this character that you already made. Yeah. So now you're, again, start that assumption of what this campaign's all about. But new people might come in at Adventure 2. So that's immediately... it's going to be fascinating to see how this works.
Yep. And like Oracle of War, it's a sequential series of adventures with each building upon the last. And then the choices that you make will affect the future, play a future adventure. So you can side with side A or side B. If you go with side B, it's going to affect how the adventure runs next time or somewhere down the road. And you get to go through several of the domains of dread. Each adventure will focus on one subgenre of horror as a thematic anchor, and there's been articles up on different types of horror.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting look at things as well.
Yeah, and in case anybody doesn't know, Van Richten's guide is being written such that each domain of dread touches on a different horror subgenre. So then, by exploring these different domains in this campaign, you'll get to sort of walk through them.
Yeah. And that's just as a complete offshoot. That's something that we've been doing in Grim Hollow, being a dark fantasy campaign. We've been sort of looking at different aspects of horror and sort of highlighting undead versus body horror versus all of these different cosmic horror. So it's fun to see Wizards doing that now. And not that they still took it from us, because they don't even know who we are, but it's great to see that, to touch on as many different fandoms as possible.
Yeah, and they're going to start and end the series with a bang. There are 14 adventures, and the first and last are both epics with multi-group play interaction. So this is where I suddenly go, wait, we're making our characters during an epic?
Right. That confused me as well. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how it goes. Maybe. But each adventure is premiering at one of the virtual play weekends rather than at an in-person convention, which is unusual or different. But I understand why they're doing it, since there aren't any in-person conventions going on at the moment, although hopefully soon. So there we go. You won't have to track experience points or milestones or use other sorts of leveling systems. When you play an adventure, you simply ensure that your character is the level required for play. And they will have content warnings to help you understand what's going to be in it and to help your dungeon master describe what's in it. If you're dealing with horror, you're possibly dealing with some graphic or troubling aspects of life. So you sort of need those.
Yeah, and then Dragon Plus adds a potential tie-in to this. They say in the magazine that May's virtual weekend, which is coming up, will offer a preview of the House of Lament adventure, which is found in Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, and that might be tied into the start of Mist Hunters in some way. So it may be that if you play a House of Lament in May, then when it goes to the next... was this July? So the virtual play weekend after, skip one, and then you'll be doing the Mist Hunters campaign, and there may be some tie-in there. So just fascinating, right? Yeah.
I don't have a lot of time. I can't really sit down for 4 hours to play too much anymore, but I'm tempted to for May, and definitely going into this new campaign. I want to see what it's all about.
I want to try that too.
And Chris Tulloch came back to the D&D side of things and is taking over organized play as well as these sort of convention experiences. He is the genius behind the Expeditions program and the D&D Encounters program from 4th edition, which was such a huge success. So I'm really excited to see what Chris is going to bring to all of this new content.
And he has a fantastic way of creating excitement with the teams that he works with. So it'll be neat. And I can't imagine, I mean, you and I have had our fair share of doing first experiences where there's sort of a tall order that's being asked of you. I mean, you more than probably any other designer. And I can only help but think, and I'm sure you did this too, what would it be like if I had to create this, right? Like create this, design your own character under this situation. Oh, it'd be fascinating. What a task.
this is the reason Shawn doesn't sleep at night, right? It's like I'm laying there in bed going, okay, brain, stop. And I'm like, oh, but wouldn't it be cool if I'm like, okay, brain, stop. And so, yeah. But I mean, getting an email from Chris when he was before and recently, it's like, hey, I've got this project. I'm like, oh, just a big smile on my face because I know it's always going to be exciting and something fun. So looking forward to that. And I hope all our listeners are as well. A new Unearthed Arcana article came out with Draconic options. It touches on 3 new Draconic race options presented as an alternative to the Dragonborn, as well as a new take on the Kobold race, sort of tying it in more closely with that Draconic heritage. There are feat options based on getting Draconic powers, and then more spells based on infamous or famous dragons from D&D lore. Did you want to comment on any of the content specifically?
No, it's all fine. Like I don't see anything broken. I don't see anything, that's tremendously problematic. I just don't know that it's the kind of thing that excites me. Maybe because I don't have its context. Like, I'm fine with Dragonborn. I don't know why I need 3 types.
Right. 3 types that are almost the same as the original. Right. Or very close, right? It's the old Dragonborn. You had a breath weapon. You used it as a bonus action, and then it recovered on a short rest. So it's basically a quote unquote encounter power. And
I can already play a kobold.
Right.
So you've changed it a bit. You've given it a different power. I don't know. Like,
what I was excited when I read it, when I started to read it, and then I read it, and I was like, it's great, it's fine, but like somebody on the DM's Guild could have done this, and I would have said, yeah, this is a sound person's, a sound designer's look at a different way to do Dragonborn, but it's not innovative in the way that I want new content from Wizards to be innovative. So
maybe we'll touch on that in a bit.
Yeah.
A few news items later.
Right. I don't hate it, but I don't. Not looking forward to it. New casting for the D&D movie.
Yeah, Chloe Coleman, who is a 12-year-old actress from My Spy and Avatar 2 and several other upcoming films. One is a sci-fi, and so beyond Avatar 2. So interesting addition. We have a young member that will be doing some role. There's no info on what they are doing, but be cool to see her.
Okay. The cast, it's just good news as more and more people are cast because it's more and more likely that the film gets made.
Yeah, and she's in a number of films, so for being a young actress, clearly someone who's commanding. I mean, you're an Avatar too, right? So like this is not not inconsequential to grab a talented child actress.
Right. It's not a B movie at this point,
right?
For sure. So I didn't read Dragon Plus issue number 37, except to look at the cover, which was absolutely amazing. So Ralph Horsley, who is an artist that has worked for Wizards, obviously, before and is supremely talented, made a re-envisioning of the old red box cover with the fighter facing off against the dragon, only it's kobolds who are kind of posing. So there's 2 kobolds on each other's shoulder with a sword, and then the dragon is this model of a dragon that is being worked by kobolds, and then there's an artist a kobold artist with an easel drawing it as the big fighter against the real dragon. So it's so
almost
witty, so
Dali-like, or any of those other classics. The painting kobold is painting. The painting is the actual red box cover,
right?
And the painter is turned looking at us, right, to sort of acknowledge all the walls being broken. It's one of the best pieces of D&D art that I have seen. I mean, it's unbelievable. I can't believe that anybody came up with this idea, and that then Ralph Horsley pulls it off like this is unbelievable. Just go look at the cover if you do nothing else. I mean, wow. Yeah. A truly classic Dragon magazine type cover. Unbelievable.
Great stuff. So what else is in this issue?
I'll give you a super quick rundown. We're in no depth, all just reasons to check it out. We introduced the new senior art director, Arcana. We cover Jasper's Game Day, the organization raising money for suicide prevention and awareness. And later on, we're told that there will be a link in the May Jasper's Game Day, which is May 7th to 9th, or the May Virtual Play Weekend will also coincide with Jasper's Game Day. So you can play virtual play weekends, and automatically, if you play like a Ravenloft game, you'll be giving money to suicide prevention. It comes right out of your tickets. It's perfect. There will also be panel discussions and virtual play weekends. The first one is focusing on advice for dungeon masters, so that's new. The UK Scouts have added a D&D scouting badge, which is always really cool.
Sweet.
There are reader-submitted strange tomes that you could find in Candlekeep. One is Leoman's Guide to Tiny Hut Holidays.
I like that.
Awesome. There are a number of really fun ones like that. So if you're looking for just books to chuck into Candlekeep, this is a great way to do it. In fact, we kept a list like this when you and I wrote the Candlekeep adventure that was during D&D Next.
Yeah.
One of the DMs started writing down names of all the books because everybody coming in had to give a unique book. Right. And they gave me that list, and then I added to it. And so I have a huge list of very funny names from players, too, which is great. They looked in D&D Classics. They always look at old articles, and this time, because it's sort of April-ish, they look at funny articles from D&D's past and funny covers, including one with the ecology of the flump, which is a great read.
Your favorite?
It's pretty good. Maps of the month, you can download maps and art for Candlekeep Mysteries. That's new that they have art that you can download too, but that's a cool way to, now you've got a prop you can use when you're running virtual tabletop, things like that. Character Spotlights continues to evolve. Last month we got the first one of these, or last issue. Max Dunbar and Adam Lee pair up to draw and design cool NPCs. And this time we get more of like scenarios, like actual encounter, a skeleton of an encounter with actual monster stats and suggested monster manual monsters that we can use in the scenarios. Really well done. Plus you get Max Dunbar's awesome art of it. So that's really cool. Best of the DM's Guild focuses on two things, horror and Candlekeep. You get a free copy of Murder in Mossbank, a Q&A with Ashley Warren's The Storytelling Collective, which she says has almost run 10,000 people through this program on how to write adventures in 3 years. What?
Yeah, that's busy. That's
man.
Busy.
I mean, I knew Ashley Warren was cool, but this is that's how can I grow up to be her? Pause and reflect. All right. Moving on. Article on Virtual Play Weekends, talked about that. And the last is an interview with Brian Perry, who is the director of franchise marketing, and gives sort of his angle on how he got there and what to do.
Nice. Oh, well, thank you for that. Wizards of the Coast is now directing some of the D&D translations. For 5e, Wizards had contracted Gale Force 9 to do the translations. In turn, Gale Force 9 had contracted country-specific translators, and then there were some issues of localization based on that. There was even a lawsuit at one point when Wizards tried to end that contract with Gale Force 9. So it is obviously something that Wizards is thinking of, right? Yeah. Growing the brand, growing the game outside of English-speaking countries and areas.
And the big change now looks to be that so Wizards sort of tried to pull back from some areas, and Gale Force 9 actually sued Wizards, and then they came to some agreement. And we're all still moving on as we were before, except areas where Gale Force 9 is not doing the translation, such as Italy, where Asmodee does them. Wizards is now handling those directly. And Asmodee wrote that they are no longer doing the translation for this, and apparently there's some other countries where that will be the case as well. So it looks like this is a push that Wizards will try to directly control this, which I think is probably good for the game.
Yep, I would say so. There is news of another hiring by Ghostfire Gaming. I started working there in January, and now we have acquired the talents of one Mr. James Haek.
Woof.
He is a senior game designer and head of Fables. And I wish I could tell you what that means, but I can't yet. But we at Ghostfire are very, very excited to have James on board and cannot wait to turn him loose on a number of amazing products and offerings.
Sean Merwin and James Haek together. It's kind of like Shrek and Donkey. I mean, what can't you do together?
Well, I am definitely Donkey in that in that duo.
James Haek has layers. Confirmed.
Yes.
No, this is, I mean, what a great hire. Like, if you're looking at being an organization that wants to bring in somebody awesome, I mean,
Yep.
wow. So this means that a few issues ago where I said that he was going to be, I think, planting turnips. I forget what exactly I came up with, but that was apparently misinformation, and I want to apologize for that now.
we need to offer a retraction. The first
retraction.
The first Mastering Dungeons retraction goes to Teos.
James not actually becoming a farmer.
Not a turnip farmer. He is he is the Fable
head of Fables.
Head
that
of
sounds
Fables,
cool.
yeah. And more James news, but this is James Introcaso. MCDM has released the Illrigger class, a completely new class, empowered by a major pact with a devil. So you took a look at this in depth.
I sure did, and this is going to tie into a little bit, that Draconic ancestry type approach of wizards sort of not doing anything sort of surprising, because this is the opposite. This is really quite innovative. It's not to say that it isn't without any what's the word I'm trying to get? Without any basis in past design, but
right.
it's how they combine it is very refreshing. So the idea is devils came together to create an unusual organization of elite shock troops and gave them the independence to go out and handle issues and resolve threats as they see fit. And you are one of these Illriggers. The core class is around this concept of the pact with a major devil, but and you get some features around that, manipulating an audience, manipulating life force between beings, conjuring a mystic seal you place on creatures for an effect. You also have this thing called Invoke Authority, which lets you invoke the powers of hell once per day. And the extra effect is then determined by your subclass. And the subclass now colors what kind of Illrigger you are. Are you more paladinish? Are you more roguish? Are you more wizardish? It's really cool, and it doesn't do any of what we see in Tasha's that's sort of full of, like, let's give you lots of reactions and bonus actions and temporary hit points and all these things that you're just kind of like, woof, that's a lot of baggage. Here, they're sort of different styles of effects, and my understanding is it's Matt Colville that did the design of this. Most of this is really him, and it has, I would say, a pretty refreshing take on how to create these various subclasses. It does not feel like it's another Tasha's or Xanathar's or anything like that. This feels fairly fresh. Again, not without precedent, but it's a different way of putting things together. So we have these three types. The Painkillers follow Dispetter and are lead from the front warriors. Shadow Masters follow Moloch and use stealth and assassination. And the Architects of Ruin, great name, follow Asmodeus and use secret lore and spells, particularly illusions. So as an example, you have this core Invoke Authority power, and if you're an Architect of Ruin, your version is Spellbreaker. You call on Asmodeus on his authority to protect you from enemy magic. Anytime you're targeted by a magic, missile spell, a line spell, or a spell that requires a range attack roll, you roll a d6. On a 1 to 5, you're unaffected. On a 6, not only are you unaffected, but it is reflected back at the caster as though it originated from you. Super cool, neat, different. You get some spells and NPCs, and one of the interesting things is you get an opening piece of fiction, very Matt Colville style approach,
right?
All full of these total tough team of groups that are taking on a big threat, and it leaves you with the feeling. It's based on the Chain live stream that he runs, but it gives you, each of those characters in the fiction are clearly a new class. So it's sort of like, oh, are we going to see all of these? Probably. Yeah. But also the threat involves time travel and planes and stuff. And you're also like, I kind of want to know more about that as well. So it's a big tease to all of what MCDM might be offering down the road.
Yeah. So it's interesting to look at, especially in that, through that lens of, well, this obviously is, there's more coming. And what could that be? And how do you, if we look at new design through fun, flavorful, and balanced, right? The fun and the flavor are are just dripping off of this
Yes.
based on that.
Super.
Historical.
Yeah, I mean, I want to play this next. Like, I read this and I was like, great. And now I want to make an Illrigger. Like, what's my next class? If the DM allows it, it'll be an Illrigger. Like, just, and I'm not sure which one, but they're all really cool.
Play one of each. Yeah. All right. And last but not least for our news, there is a new D&D Adventures League release from the Plague of Ancients campaign. This is DDAL 10-07 Into Darkness by Oliver Darkshire. Times have been especially hard on the Goliaths of Wormdoom Crag, and losing the few hunters they have left to Neogi slavers will certainly spell their doom. You must delve into the ruins of an ancient city buried beneath the spine of the world. What secrets lay in the deep dark? Do they promise salvation or doom? Part 7 of the Plague of Ancients series of adventures. 4-hour adventure for APL 8. Cool. So you can pick that up on the DM's Guild.
And the Neogi are from Spelljammer, so therefore
Spelljammer confirmed. Absolutely. Whew. So that was a lot of news to cover. So because of that, as we said, we are going to only focus on the Dungeon Master Tools part of Tasha's Cauldron of Everything this week, where we will finish up talking about puzzles. So what this section does is it begins by giving you the soft sell on puzzles. Talks about devious traps and multifaceted mysteries being a staple of fantasy adventures, which is true, but they're not the easiest challenge for a DM to present on the fly. Also very true. So what they want to do is give you a lot of information on puzzles and then give you some sample puzzles. So they go through. The one thing that they failed to mention, we are going to do this service by mentioning it for you now, DMs or game designers, is that some people love puzzles. Some people hate puzzles with an irrational disgust. I have been at more than one table where the adventure had a puzzle, and when I presented the puzzle, one or more players got up and left and did not come back. That's the reaction that some people will have. So I'm talking about people that have paid like $15 for a 4-hour game and would have rather left and forfeited that money than do a puzzle. And not even a big puzzle, right? A regular old puzzle. So you need to be aware of that before you engage in any bepuzzlement in your adventures. There are ways, as we will discuss, to grease the wheels, as it were, to give the spoonful of sugar to help the puzzle be delivered. And so always keep that in mind. If you have a Venn diagram of people who love D&D and people who love puzzles, I think when the game first came out, it was probably very similar. They were very close. I think as time has passed, that circle of Venn diagram has gotten a little further and further away. So always be aware of that. Even if you love puzzles, you may not be in the overwhelming majority of D&D players.
Yeah, and I think that because they don't address this, they also don't address what to do to make them work for more players and how to handle those situations. Or even, because they talk about how they want the whole group to be involved, they don't really tell you then how to enable that. And this is just a quick thing that when I recall a puzzle in an adventure once where there was this handout, and the handout hits the table, and my friend Ralph says the answer. Mm-hmm. And we all look at him like, wait, what? That you solved it? Yep. And what it was lines from a poem, and the first letter of every line read downwards was the answer. Right. And he just saw that instantly and then blurted out loud, and we were all done. That was the end of our puzzle experience, right? And I think it was probably 15 years later that a puzzle hit the table, and I saw that it was the same thing, because I now, due to Ralph, I must always check for this. And I didn't say it out loud. Right. And that's a thing that you have to establish with your players, right? Is how to make it fun for everybody. And you may have to have some talks around the puzzles when they hit the table. Like, all right, if you see it, think about how you can help everybody else, or how do you get everybody involved, right?
Yeah. I had a similar experience running an old Living Greyhawk adventure where the 8 intelligence, 8 wisdom barbarian we put the puzzle down, and it was a sequence of numbers, and you were supposed to correspond the numbers to something else and then figure out what number comes next. But it was also, if you could figure out the sequence, you could just, so I read the numbers out loud, and the guy playing the barbarian just said 7, and everyone just turned and looked, because it was a huge thing of numbers. I was like, yeah, it's 7. He was like, yeah, that was just the number that came to mind. I'm like, okay. Because it was sort of like a Rain Man kind of experience, right?
That's
where
awesome.
The number popped into his head. And so you have those sorts of situations, and you have to figure out how to handle those. Yeah. But what they do present first is a why use puzzles section. And the immediate answer to that is because some people like puzzles.
Yeah. And it's a different type of brain activity. Right?
Exactly. So, but they give a list of bullet points about why puzzles can be fun, provide exciting opportunities to use wit to overcome obstacles, and allow characters to collaborate to make discoveries. You can encourage the party to discover information through teamwork. Absolutely. You can provide an opportunity for characters to use their skills in uncommon ways. Yes, true. You can make a setting feel more whimsical, mysterious, or otherworldly. Sure. To explain why no one has ever discovered something hidden close at hand. That's an important one. Because sometimes when you're writing an adventure, you need a reason why everyone in the village hasn't found the secret door.
True. Yeah.
So you can make that the reason why. Or to reveal,
and enter.
Yeah, or you can reveal a secret that no one knows, or to reveal a secret that no one knows, and that magic can't reveal.
Yeah.
So you can't just cast a spell and solve the problem. You have to think it through. They also say that puzzles can take a considerable time to solve, so be mindful of how often you use them in your adventures. Most puzzles don't need to be solved immediately, and they might be more satisfying when they linger over multiple sessions and take that time to resolve. And that can be very true. One of those things that someone who hates puzzles might be more liable to enjoy them is if it's not just a handout set in front of them, right, and you have 10 minutes to fix it. You present the first clue and slowly begin to work toward that answer.
Yep. Yeah. So then we get this sort of block that is called puzzle elements, and it walks us through what all of the 13 puzzles that they give us will use. And this is actually really cool. Like if you're a designer, a GM, you should come in and look at, if all you looked at was this would be good, because it does. By having this framework, it solves a lot of problems that puzzles have around clarity and purpose. So we get box text to describe it to players, and then we get a difficulty. This is a little maybe, but it's easy, medium, or hard. And interestingly, nothing relates to XP here. So it's just a gauge. Right. Puzzle features, what it looks like to the players, plus any hidden aspects. That's important, right? What does it look like? You know, you've got the box text, but what else can they find and see, right? If they look in the bottom, they see this. Then the solution. And this is really important. I don't know how many times there has been a puzzle in a organized play adventure that did not tell me how the players will arrive at the solution. Sometimes it doesn't even tell me the solution. Right. Those are the worst. But it might not, so if the players are like, how are we supposed to figure this out? And I go, I don't know either.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, that's the worst. So very important. Have a solution part that tells you what the solution is and how it's derived. Hint checks is interesting. And I very much like what they're trying to do here, which is to say, like, look, you might get stalled, so here's how you can move things forward. But it uses skills as the determinant factor. All of them here are DC 10. So it's sort of an easy check that then reveals something. I'm not hugely a fan of the particular examples they gave and how much info is given. But the important part to me is just know that it's good to give hints. And there's a whole section on hints that we'll talk about. Right. Then customizing the puzzle, how you can customize it to your adventure, change the difficulty, and so on. These are great, really good. Just draws out the idea that you can take their example puzzle and do a lot with it. And just again, this is a really good section to look at when you're creating a puzzle to cover all of these bases.
Yeah. And so they delve deeper into hints after that, giving you some examples of hints. So if the players get stuck, you can give a hint via a skill check. And this gets to a question that a lot of people have, or one of the reasons why some people say they don't like puzzles is because it relies only on the player's knowledge and intelligence and reasoning skills rather than the characters. And so what this will do is allow players to receive hints based on skill checks of their characters, which I have some hesitancy to give 100% thumbs up to, but at least you are now allowing the characters to interact as much as the players. However, if people are getting frustrated because they can't figure out a puzzle or a clue of a puzzle, so then you say, okay, give me an Arcana check because this is a magic puzzle, and they roll a 1 on their check, all you're doing is adding to that frustration. You're piling more frustration on. Yeah. So it's generally better if they need a hint, find a way to give them the hint rather than relying on some skill check that they could possibly fail.
Yeah, I don't super love the DC 10 concept, because I think the concept behind the DC 10 is that they should succeed, but there's also the what if they don't. And as you said, that creates the frustration. I prefer to just look at who the character is, right? So if you're a nature type character and there's some natural aspects involved in this, then let's just give a hint along those lines and just move what would the character know? What would this character that's asking me this question notice? Or who is the best character in the party to receive a hint and why? The ranger, sees that it's unlikely that you need to know much about these animals to solve this. It doesn't seem to draw upon it. Okay, cool.
Yeah. And another discussion around hints is sort of this, it reminds me of the exploration pillar of D&D. It's sort of this, the proverbial redheaded stepchild of D&D, where combat is its thing and role-playing is its thing. And at its face, D&D is a resource management / storytelling game where puzzles don't fit into any of those. Yeah. So if you find a way, if you're developing a puzzle for a game, to make there be consequences for success or failure other than just the big yes or no at the end. So for every hint that's used, a resource is used or the story changes in some way. Bring in those elements to the success and failure at the puzzle's whim, or the situation around the puzzle's whim as things change.
Yeah. And an interesting thing to do around this sort of skill check is to do a little more engagement. So you can always say to a character, tell me exactly what you're doing. Well, I'm fiddling with the image that I see. Make me a skill check, and I'm going to give you information no matter what you roll. You don't say that aloud, but you're going to give a hint regardless. If the dice are really good, cool, you can reward them for that, and that's the explanation. But you might say, like, well, you don't necessarily know about it, but as you're messing with it, here's a hint, right? Just find a reason to give the hint that feels like a scene in a movie where they are interacting with it and coming up with something.
Yeah. And another thing is, if you're going to give a hint, make sure the hint actually helps.
Yes.
Because puzzles are, we'll talk about running the puzzles, but puzzles are that sort of thing where there is no such thing for me as an easy puzzle. There is a more complicated puzzle, but there's not necessarily an easy puzzle, because most puzzles require this sort of insider knowledge of something. There is the twist, and it can be a very as soon as you understand that it's about counting letters in a word,
right,
you get it. But getting to that point may never happen.
Right.
So you have to make sure the hints that you give are going to help move the characters and the players in the right direction.
Yeah, we have this little box of like sort of riddle things that we sometimes break out at dinner in my house. And it's funny how, on any given night, someone will get it, but it's never the same person. And it's just your brain kind of, if it makes that leap and links it together, well, then it's so much easier, right? But if you don't, you have no basis for moving forward.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So and one more thing about hints. The best kind of hint you can give, as far as I'm concerned, is the hint that lets people know when they're off track.
Yeah.
Especially if it's a long process in the puzzle and they get the first step of that process wrong. Don't make them go all the way through figuring out all of these complicated things to give an answer that's wrong. Let them know with the first time they're off track, so they don't spend the next 20 minutes doing all the other figuring to just get a completely wrong answer.
And from a design perspective, when you have phases to a thing, design it so each phase gives you something, a rewarding click, a glow, something that says, all right, phase 1 complete to the party. Because otherwise they'll get to phase 3 and they'll go, what if we didn't actually do phase 1 right? And you're like, oh God, please don't go back to phase 1.
Exactly.
So that's where you want to, in your design, if there are steps, make sure they know that they are on the right path as they go. There's no reason for that to happen. And taking a step back on puzzles, the point of a puzzle is not tricking your players. The point of a puzzle is making them feel cool. So that can be non-intuitive because you're doing this thing that's hard to solve, but the whole point of it is for them to actually solve it working together. So you want to eliminate all frustration and let them know they're on the right track or on the wrong track appropriately.
For sure. And then there's a section on running puzzles, which I will let Teos walk us through.
Yeah, it's a short section, but it's generally good advice on providing details as you think that's needed, letting hints slip as needed. It says to not worry whether it's a player or character solving the puzzle. I think that's arguable, but I like the point that in the end, the important part is the group having a good time. And that is for sure the most important piece. I think some people can feel that if it's just them as people solving it, as a person, not as the character, that is less fun, but others are. So you just have to experiment with your group. And I think this is where they could have used a little more information. They say encourage the party to solve it together. I think there just could be some more examples of that. But yeah, you want to be careful to not have a single player blurt out a riddle answer immediately. Thanks, Ralph. And I forget, did you make this note about having enough handouts? That's really...
If you're running it at a convention, say, and it's a puzzle that people need to look at a handout, bring one for everyone. Because what will happen sometimes, if it's a puzzle, you throw the piece of paper on the table, and the most overly enthusiastic player will grab it, pull it right up to their face, and start going through it and not letting everyone get a chance to see. So
even at home, I think that's an important thing, to make sure that it's not the kind of thing that two people can see it on the table surface and the others can't. Right.
Yep. So those are just a few bits of advice. Then they give example puzzles, and these are interesting, and I can't say all of them are perfect in the way that they're designed, but it gives you a decent idea of how to think through puzzles and which ones are more likely to work well in your games.
Yeah, and that's one of the big gifts of this is they devoted the space to 13. So for sure if you read those, you'll get a good feeling for the type of puzzle you could create, and all of them tend to be fairly flexible around creation. All right, first one is creature paintings. This is supposed to be easy. Okay. It's a gallery of 7 paintings in a room, and there is a plaque presenting a riddle-like clue where the word count is mentioned, and that's the key to the solution. So each painting has a number of creatures of a particular kind, and we get a little table that summarizes them for the DM. Counting into each creature's name by the number of creatures in the painting then reveals a letter. So for example, if the painting has 3 gnolls in it, the letter is the third in the word gnoll. What is it? It's a gnoll. There are 3, so therefore I go G-N-O. O is the answer. Then you get all these, one letter from each painting, and you scramble them. They're scrambled probably just because they'll see whatever painting they happen to look at. When you unscramble it, it gives the code of owlbear. We get guidance on how the puzzle solution could be relevant to the adventure, like maybe there's a stuffed owlbear with treasure in another room or something else. Example of hint checks: an intelligence investigation DC 10 to deduce that the number of creatures is important and uses that number to determine the letter in the creature's name they should review. I mean, that's kind of the whole puzzle.
Right.
So
that's why giving hints is hard.
Hint.
Right. Giving hints is hard because that basically tells you the whole puzzle. But that might be all that the players want. Maybe the players just taking the time to count the letters, that's the fun. Right. Because I have put into games and I have seen in games puzzles much easier than this not be solvable by the players.
Yeah.
And it's not because the players weren't bright. It's not because the players weren't paying attention. It's just that it did not click. The word count, and even knowing the word count is key, might not trigger that exact thing.
Yeah.
So it's tough.
But on the other hand, you also have 6 players. And so if you were to give them that intelligence investigation DC 10, it might give it all away.
Yeah.
And so I tend to prefer to step towards that, like lean towards that, like, emphasizing that count matters. In fact, the wisdom perception DC 10 is to realize that the words count on alert you that you should count the creatures. And to me, that's a little better of a start with that, work up to it, give more as you need.
Yeah.
So my main advice here is read over your hints and adjust as needed on the fly. These are not, a Bible or an order of operations thing that you must do. Just go with it as it makes sense. And again, weave it into what people are doing. Tell me what your, fighter is doing. Okay, well, when you do that.
Right.
They give you customization options, so you can change the creatures to be objects, right? The number of objects in a painting, or it could be decorated on pedestals or whatever. They could be members of professions, anything logically that's in a group that you might say, okay, there's a number of these in each of these instances. And then you have this letter counting aspect to create the solution.
Yeah.
So.
Did you want to talk about any of the other ones before going on to our closing thoughts and tips?
Let me do skeleton keys, because I think this is a neat one that you can use. I like this is to me an example of truly what I think is fairly simple. Okay. So it's a sinister box, iron lock into each of its 4 sides. So 4 locks on 4 sides. Each lock has a sculpted image above the place where you'd put the key: bat, snake, spider, wolf. There are 4 iron keys hanging on a nearby wall. The box text actually highlights that you have different numbers of teeth on the iron keys, but there's also a handout, and I probably just use the handout if I need to push further. Yeah. But the whole point is that the number of teeth on each key matches the number of letters in the image: bat, snake, spider, wolf. If you put the wrong key in the lock, you summon, say, D4 giant bats or whatever, depending on which side you put it into. If you put in the right one, it unlocks. When you do a 4, the whole thing opens. And I think this is a kind of neat idea that you can very easily customize this type of thing to be, it could be a door, it could be, it doesn't have to be a box, it can be different kinds of images, but something that gives you, you're counting the numbers, and that's what it is.
I'm going to talk about the final one, and then I'm going to come back and ask you a question. The one I want to talk about was Eye of the Beholder, which you're going through a maze, and a goblin will help you pick the right direction. He asks you a riddle, and in this case, each of the riddles, the whole bunch of riddles is about idioms or phrases that use the word "I," and so based on the answer, you get a word. And then based on the first letter of the word that you get, you know whether you should go north, south, east, or west, which is cool. I literally have done this puzzle before in my adventure. An adventure I wrote, I know that I used "I" and then used riddles and used a word. So I don't know if someone who wrote this read that, or if they came up with it on their own. It's possible. The issue, though, is different languages, right? Is an eye of a needle is an English expression. I wonder what it is in French and German and Spanish and Chinese, and And the same thing goes back to the skeleton key one, right? What's spider in Spanish?
Araña.
How many letters?
So 5.
Okay. So right there we're off.
Yeah.
So now if you're DMing in a different language, you have to change the number of locks or change the number of tines on the key, or change the animals that are there to match up, which is not terribly difficult to do, but it still takes so all of these sort of wordplay, counting the letters things is fine if you're running and playing in English and writing in English. But as soon as you step out of that, all of these puzzles become problematic for the DM.
Yeah. So I have 2 quick thoughts on this. One is I ran a table in Spanish of the sort of second or the other first Icewind Dale Adventure for Organized Play for AL. Okay. And it has a puzzle that's a fun puzzle, somewhat complex. And I had all these, tools like online stuff and whatever. But since I was running in Spanish, it was sort of like this. It's like I would have had to have redesigned the puzzle.
Right.
I couldn't just tell them it in Spanish.
Yeah.
So I said, hey, here's the deal. If anybody, most of the players were bilingual. So I said, if you want to solve it, here's a link in chat to take a look. Otherwise, I'm going to assume that we would do this because it is in English and,
Right.
And so we're going to have our fun elsewhere. And they were all fine with it. And one of the players came back and said, all right, the answer is blah. And I'm like, yep, yes, it is. Good job, Right. But it had to be that. The other is these examples here are all based on idioms, as you pointed out. And one of the things that my kids stun me with constantly is they don't know these sayings and these idioms.
Right.
I think it's the internet age and things are different, but we're not passing these sayings on as we once did.
Yeah.
And so things that older people might think are relevant and known, are ubiquitous, are not necessarily. And it's probably the other way as well, where young people might think everybody knows a particular saying, but it might not be. So you have to be careful with these. Yeah.
Yeah. Because, I read whose eye matters to a witch's brew, and I'm thinking hag's eye. Right, because unless you know Shakespeare, you're not going to the Eye of Newt, right? The windows being the eyes to the soul, or eyes are the windows to the soul. Yeah, that's not around much anymore. So it's all, you got to be careful with these things. And so let's talk about tips and closing thoughts. My biggest tip is if you create a puzzle for an adventure, whether it's published or you just use it with your home group, play test it. You don't need a D&D group to play test a puzzle like these generally. You could just say, hey, if how would you handle this? Coworkers or people at lunch or, family. Let people actually do it. See how they engage with it intellectually and see what hints work best to first nudge them in the right direction and then just sort of present the answer.
Yeah. I think that giving good clues when things are wrong is very important. So you don't want you don't want people to feel dumb as they're doing puzzles. And you'd be surprised how simple and easy a puzzle can be and be rewarding. Sometimes I'll put little puzzles in things that are, out of 6 people, it's at 100% chance someone's going to come up with this. It's so simple. And every time they treat it as if it was hard. Like they're all super excited, and especially the player that said it. And they're so happy. And it's so funny because it's not like it's hard, right? And there are 6 of you. But it just shows you that that's really what we're here to do, is to have fun and not to feel frustrated. And if you think of a lot of puzzles that we do, like say a crossword puzzle, in that setting where we're, burning time on a plane or a train, it's okay for us to not solve them all. We're just spending time. But in D&D, a crossword puzzle is kind of too hard, right?
Right. Yeah. Even a simple puzzle takes a significant amount of time if you're running in a 2-hour or a 4-hour slot. So that's totally, I don't think you can make a puzzle that's too easy.
Yeah.
And
I created one for a home campaign that was for Dark Sun that was based off the merchant calendar, and it had all this lore and things they had to look up. They did not have fun, and they did not solve it.
Right.
They took the damage and worked through it, and it was just one of those things where I was like, wow, I overthought this. What was I doing? I didn't think of what they wanted. I thought about me being clever, and it was not me being clever.
Yeah. And as much as you can, have the puzzle make sense within the world that you are creating it in. It's fun to do the word search or whatever, but unless it is actually something that's on the floor where they have to walk across it, or having the riddle to open the door, have it make sense that it would be useful or make sense within the world to have that riddle to open the door. Have it move the story and the game forward rather than just being this thing that sets between the characters and the rest of the adventure.
Yeah, it's hard to do that. It's also hard to predict what type of puzzle a party will like. And I'm thinking of when we worked together to design, along with Sean Molly, a puzzle that would be part of the D&D Open for Tomb of Annihilation. And we had this idea of having the players do physical things like stack dice quickly, use a Nerf crossbow to hit a target across the room. So they were actually physically doing things. And we were all thinking this might be a giant failure because we're pulling them out of character to kind of do these things. They might hate this. This could really go poorly. And we were just kind of like, oh, let's see what happens. And they loved it. They really enjoyed it because I think in part it gave them a real break from what they normally do. So you kind of never know, right? And there's some experimentation you just have to do, but be ready to, you're not going to, don't make it an hour-long experience, make it a short experience and then see, and then you can do more in the type that they like over time.
Yep. Any other tips or thoughts that you wanted to share on puzzles?
Sort of like when we talked about with exploration, you can combine things, right? So having a puzzle in a combat, in this case, something very simple, very small, can be super rewarding, right? So like if you think of that skeleton keys puzzle, but there are only 2 keys, and if you unlock these things, maybe there are 2 types of undead in the room, ghouls and skeletons, and flipping each one gives you a benefit towards them, right? They're vulnerable to your damage or something like that. Right. That is really cool. But when you do these kinds of things where you put a puzzle in a combat, players hate to give up their actions, and they are very resistant to, say, moving 30 feet to a wall and interacting with that wall when they could just whack the thing in front of them.
Yep.
So you must really make it easy for them to do whatever it is they need to do with this. And in fact, consider things where they don't have to physically interact. Like, can they just say a word? Can they do an action that they would have on them already, like pour a liquid on something because everybody has some sort of liquid thing in their backpack, something like that, to make it super easy because players are surprisingly hard to convince to do something other than the normal actions. Right. But when you can do that, it's super rewarding and super fun.
Yep. Yeah, and sometimes you might get the idea of, well, I want them to not interact with the combat, but interact with this other thing, even though there's a threat around. So I'm just going to have everything be immune to their damage until they solve the puzzle, which works mechanically, but you will be surprised at what lengths players will go to, as Teo said, not to do the thing that's obvious if there is any sort of combat to be done. I mean, they will literally spend 10 rounds trying 10 different things to damage the monster, even though they've tried fire and they've tried bludgeoning and they've tried this and they've tried that. And they've made the Arcana check that says these things are going to be resistant or immune to damage until the altar is turned off. You will still have players trying to do things other than solve the puzzle. So
you just have to learn over time with how to do it. But you cannot make it too easy for people to do the things. You must make it, and if you don't make it hard, they will never ever touch it. Also, that you can combine exploration with puzzles. So if we think of that beholder puzzle that you talked about, that is one where you're sort of just, the puzzle is the exploration mechanic, and if you fail 3 times, a beholder shows up. But imagine that instead it's more like a skill challenge, and we're navigating the maze, but these riddles come up periodically, and what they actually do is give us treasure if we get them right. Now there's a built-in reward, and it sort of pauses. It gives us sort of phases of exploration. Right, you make it into these crumbling catacombs, and as you're working through that part of the maze, the goblin spirit shows up and gives you a riddle. And when you solve it, you learn maybe more about the lore of these spirits, and you get to where the treasure was. And that's a kind of rewarding piece that, as you're exploring, adds benefit. So that whole combining a puzzle with something can be fun.
Yeah. Or with each,
go ahead.
I'd say with each riddle that you solve, the beholder can use one less eye when it's fought at the end, or something like that.
Yeah, and then you could weave it into something like that. There's lore around how the key to fighting it was knowledge or something like that, and that they were only able to best the creature at the end by doing this. And now okay, this matters. Yep. The other thing is to think of, my last step would be thinking about movies and how they portray puzzles to make it really fun for everybody, right? The Fifth Element, right? The end of it. Classic puzzle, classic, super enjoyable, right? Where you have these pillars and elements, and how do you bring the element to each one? Do you have a match? Do you have a, right? The Trap Corridor in Raiders of the Lost Ark, where there are these visual elements to them, and you can try and test and best them, and even make mistakes. Last Crusade has all the, only the penitent person shall pass and things like that. Those are simple and fun designs that almost any group will have most of their players enjoy, because they're sort of simple like that, right? Somehow you must be able to pass this chasm, but no magic will work, right?
Right.
Well, how do we, right? And it's fun.
Yep. So that is our puzzling look at puzzles. And that concludes our look at the DM's Tools chapters of Tasha's. Next week, we will give you more news, and we will talk about Wizards, I think, is where we're up to on the player side of things. And maybe we'll even get into group patrons next week as well.
Ooh, cool.
So thank you all for listening. We hope you have enjoyed the show. And thank you to our patrons. If you would like to be a patron of the show, you can go to patreon.com/MMP. Teos, where can people find you on social media?
I can be found on the Twitters at AlphaStream, and you can see my blog at alphastream.org.
And what a great blog it is. What a great blog it is. You can find me on Twitter at Shawn Merwin, or you can go to the forums at forums.misdirectedmark.com. And you can follow the podcast on Twitter at MasteringDND. Mastering Dungeons is a Misdirected Mark production, the media arm of Encoded Designs. So, Teos, now that we have puzzled our way through this episode, what are we going to do now?
I think I'm going to kill some monsters that I find in the Grim Hollow Monster Grimoire. So
okay.
Because the Kickstarter is still up.
Thank you for the support.
Here to plug you.